We continue now at the top of Daf Pei Beis Amud Aleph Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 82a. On the previous Amud, the Mishnah said if you have nitonin bifnim, which is blood that's supposed to be applied inside the Beis HaMikdash, and that blood gets mixed up with blood that is supposed to be applied to the outer Mizbeach, so then yishafech liyama, it has to be poured down the drain of the Azara. And the Gemara asked on the previous Amud, why doesn't the Mishnah bring the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer as it brought in earlier Mishnayos, that Rabbi Eliezer holds of Rowan? And if he holds of Rowan, we can say that you can apply the blood, let's say, inside the Beis HaMikdash, and the blood that's not supposed to be applied in the Beis HaMikdash will view that as water, and then you can apply the blood outside the Beis HaMikdash. Why isn't Rabbi Eliezer's halacha brought in the Mishnah? And the Gemara in the previous Amud said, how would you do it according to Rabbi Eliezer in this situation? Because in this situation, you would not be able to apply the blood first to the outer Mizbeach and then bring it in and apply it inside the Beis HaMikdash, because the inner blood is supposed to be applied first. That's supposed to precede the outer blood. And the Gemara continues and says, V'nesiv lifnim v'hadar nesiv lachot. So then we'll suggest that according to Rabbi Eliezer, first we should bring it into the Beis HaMikdash and do those applications, and then bring the blood outside the Mikdash and do those applications. But that's also problematic. Kevan di'ika chatos v'yasham, since, for example, you might have carbon chatos or carbon asham, and we're talking here about outer chatos, outer asham, supposed to be applied to the outer Mizbeach. In those cases, by those particular karbanos, as the Mishnah said, when the blood is brought into the Mikdash, psulin, that actually becomes disqualified. So that's problematic in that situation. So therefore, lo psikole, therefore the solution is not good across the board. It wouldn't work by chatas and asham, and that's why the Mishnah didn't bring this solution according to Rabbi Eliezer. And Rashi explains, Nesiv bifnim v'hadar nesiv b'achutz. Let's first do the inside, then the outside. To halu Rabbi Eliezer, shar damim hanichnasim lahechol ksherin, because according to Rabbi Eliezer, other bloods that enter the hechol are kosher, chutz mechatos v'yasham, except for chatos and asham. Kediktani masnisan, as our Mishnah said, kevan di'ika chatos v'yasham. But the Gemara says no, since there is the example of chatos and asham, shim nisarvu damam b'damim hapnimim, if their blood gets mixed up with the inner blood, lo matzi lameimar yiten bifnim. So there you can't say first do the applications inside, and then do them outside, and because then the outer ones are going to be disqualified. So lo psikole, so it's not true across the board. Rashi says, V'im Tomer, now if you're going to say lifselinu l'chitzonim, why don't we disqualify the outer blood lahachsher penimim in order to render fit the inner blood? In other words, bring it inside, and enochinami. What will actually happen is that the outer blood will be disqualified, but at least we'll be able to apply the inner blood. So to that Rashi says, Lemifselinu biodayim lo k'amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer would not say that you're supposed to actively disqualify. That's not something Rabbi Eliezer would allow. Umutav lahamten at shchiyas hacham. It's better to wait until sunset, v'yifselu me'alein, and then they'll be disqualified automatically on their own, v'yishavchem la'am, and then they can be poured down the drain of the Azara. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Shahaya Rabbi Akiva Omer, that Rabbi Akiva would say that it's not only by an outer carbon chatos where the blood is brought inside of the hechel that we say it's disqualified, but it's true by all outer carbonos where the blood is brought into the hechel that it's disqualified. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, Moshe l'mahadavar doma. What is this similar to? The issue over here is that the pasuk says, Kol chatos asher yuva midama. The pasuk talks about a chatos. Rabbi Akiva is extending it to all carbonos. So what is that a mashal to? L'talmud shemazag l'rabo b'chamin, a student who pours for his master with hot water. V'amar lo mizoglin, he says, pour for me. Amar lo, he says to him, b'ameh, with what? Amar lo, he says to him, lo b'chamin anu asukin, aren't we dealing with hot water? Achshav, so now, bein b'chamin, bein b'tzonin, we mean both with hot water and with cold water. So hachinami here also, michti, let us see, bechatos askinan v'asi, the pasuk is already dealing with chatos. Chatos, the cause of Rahman Alamali, what's the point of the pasuk writing chatos? Elolav chatos kamin Allah, ela kol kachim. Rather, the pasuk doesn't just mean chatos, it means all kachim. And Rashi explains, Mashal to Rabbi Akiva, the Mashal of Rabbi Akiva, the Mashmalei Sha'ar Kol Hadamim, Bechlal Kol Chatas Asher Yuva Midama. Again, Rabbi Akiva understands that all bloods are included in Kol Chatas Asher Yuva Midama. So, Lamah Davar Dama, what's that similar to? Letalmud Shemazlag Lo L'Rabo Yayin B'chamin. The case over here is, the student is pouring his master wine with hot water. And the master says, Lo B'chamin Anu Asukin. Aren't we dealing right now with hot water? V'kevan Shani Omer Lach Mizog stam bechamen hayisi yomer lach. And if I would have said to you just pour, obviously I mean hot water. Achshav hineni yomer lach bein bechamen bein betzonin. But now I mean whether with hot water or cold water. Kilomer, what the Gemara means to say here is as follows: Ha'osek bedavar. If someone's already dealing with something, ein ragel haskiro keshemedaber. Well, he's not going to mention it when speaking about it. It's already understood. Ve'im maskiro. And if he does mention it, bedaito lahosav acher imo. If he mentions hot water when that was unnecessary, that didn't need to be mentioned, so he had in mind to add things. V'yomer, he's saying af zeh shayisi asuk bo yehe bechlal. Even what we're dealing with is also going to be included. That's what he means. Hachanami here also michdi bechatos haskinon v'asikul. A parsha, the whole parsha is dealing with chatos. Chatos tekasav rachmano lamali. Why does it say chatos? Lichto ve'im yuva midama. It should just say that if the blood comes in. Elohachi kama, rather it means lav chatos l'chud kamin. I'm not only talking about chatos. Elo af chatos keshar kodshim asher yuva. Rather it means that chatos is like other kodshim that are brought in. The lo tema, that you shouldn't say chatos lo tifsol. Maybe you would say the chatos shouldn't be disqualified. Shekein matzino chatos nechneses lahechol bechatos hapnimios, because we do have such a thing as the blood of a chatos that enters the hechol by the chatos hapnimios. And so therefore we're saying even chatos, but it applies to all kodshim. And the Gemara continues. Maskeflo Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua. Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua asks the following question: Michdi, let us see. It's Rabu kol kodshim legabe mizbeach. We include all kodshim by the mizbeach leinyan meriko shtifa, in terms of the halachas of scouring and rinsing. And so therefore chatos because of rachmano lomali. Why does it say chatos? Shma mino. We actually see the opposite of what you're saying. Chatos in, only by chatos this halach applies. Midi achrina lo, by other kodshim it does not apply. And it's really comparable to the following. The case you really should compare it to is a student who pours for his master whether with hot or with cold. Amar lo, he says, Al tim zogli elochamen, then he says to him, only pour with hot, and so it actually is a limitation, and therefore your way of understanding the pasuk is not correct. And Rashi explains, Michdi, let us see, Rabu kol kodshim lekamon. This is later on. Mehaikra, we're actually going to include all korbanos from this pasuk. Leinyan shiyu tu'unim merika ushtifa kli matchos shenesbashlu behen. Talking about, let's say you have metal vessels that you cooked inside of it, the kodshim. So then those vessels require merika and shtifa, that's scouring and rinsing. Kiri alfinam beperak dam chatos. This is going to be learned out later on in perak dam chatos. Mikodesh kadashim hi, from the pasuk kodesh kadashim hi. And v'samachle, and right near there is the pasuk we're talking about. It says v'chol chatos asher yuva. It says this pasuk of v'chol chatos. And so therefore you should understand the opposite. V'yishar kodshim nami mifsali, if other kodshim also would be included in the disqualification. Lamali lemichtav chatos, then why doesn't he write chatos? Lichtov asher yuva midam. It should just say asher yuva midam. We're already talking about all kodshim. So we see the opposite. Shma mina chatos davka kamar. So from that logic, we would actually determine that it's only chatos. And halo damya maskana dekushi, again, the real mashal is as follows, and that's all part of the question. So he's asking, if you're going to make a mashal, it should be the opposite mashal, and therefore this cannot be the source or the reasoning of Rabbi Akiva. And so the Gemara continues and says, Ella rather, Taimed Rabbi Akiva, the actual reason for Rabbi Akiva is as follows. Mechatos v'chol chatos. It says chatos v'chol chatos. It's extra words that are in the pasuk, as we are about to see. The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, so the pasuk says chatos, ainly ala chatos. If it said chatos, I only know chatos. Kodshe kodshim minayin. How do we know kodshe kodshim, karbanos that are included as the holiest of the holies? Talmud lomar kol chatos. The pasuk says kol chatos. That's extra that it says kol, and therefore we include in this halacha kodshim kalaminayin, the lesser kinds of kodshim of holiness. From where do we know those? Talmud lomar v'chol chatos. It says with a vav, it says v'chol chatos, and so therefore from those inclusions, that's how we learn out that this halacha applies to other karbanos. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Rabbi Yossi Haglili said to him, he said to Rabbi Akiva, Afilu atamar v'kol hayom kulo, even if you have all the inclusions in the world, Eini shomei alach, I'm not going to listen to you. Elo chatos, I'm only going to say that this pasuk means chatos. It says chatos, it means just chatos. And so rather it goes as follows, Elo chatos, ainli elo chatos yachid. When it says chatos, I only know the chatos of an individual. Chatos tzibur minayin, from where do we know the chatos of a communal chatos? Talmud lomar kol chatos. That's what we learn from the word kol when it says says kol chatos. V'yein li ela chatos zocher. I only know a male chatos. Chatos nekeva minayin. From where do you know even a female chatos? Talmud lomar vichol. It says with a vav vichol, and that includes chatos nekeva. The Gemara questions this last line klape lai. It seems to be going in the wrong direction because really chatos nekeva is the more standard, and so the inclusion should be chatos zocher. And the Gemara revises it. Ella rather hachikamar. It should be as follows. It means to say as follows: Ein li ala chatos nekeva. I only know chatos nekeva. Chatos zocher minayin. From where do we know chatos zocher? Talmud lomar v'chol chatos. It says v'chol chatos. And Rashi explains, Elo chatas yochid, I would only know chatas yochid, do aksiv hach parshas chatas eitzel, parshas Osham, parshas Shlomim, v'toda shein shal yechidim, because this parsha of chatas is written by Osham, Shlomim, and Toda of individuals. Then the Gemara said, Klape Lai, in which direction are you going? Stam chatas yochid nekevi. In general, a chatas yochid is a female animal, and so therefore again, the Gemara revised it. And the Gemara continues and asks, V'sava Rabbi Yossi Haglili haikra lahachi udasa. But does Rabbi Yossi Haglili really hold that the pasuk should be learned in this fashion? Again, Rabbi Yossi Haglili is responding to Rabbi Akiva and saying that it comes to include chatos tzibur and chatos zachor. Is that really true? V'atanya, but we learned in a different brisa. Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer. Rabbi Yossi Haglili says, Kol onyin kulo eino medaber ela beparim hanisrafim u'seirim hanisrafim. That actually this entire parsha is speaking about the parim hanisrafim, the bulls that are burned, and the he-goats that are burned. Those are the inner carbon chatos. Lisrof pesulein abeis habira. And the real point of the pasuk is to say that when they get disqualified, so the burning takes place abeis habira, which means the burning takes place in the mikdash, not outside. V'lamod belosa say al achiglaso, and to say there's a losa say on eating it, meaning the pasuk is really dealing with that, and it's not dealing at all with this issue of again the karbonos or the chatos where it's brought inside where it wasn't supposed to be. Amru lo, they said to him, chatos shenichnas damo lifnai v'lifnim minayin. So if that's true, so where do we know the halacha where the blood of the chatos is brought inside? Amar lehem, he said to them, I have a different source for that. Hein lohuva. He said that I have this source from Hein lohuva, a different pasuk. And so therefore, again, it seems like Rabbi Yossi Haglili is not using this pasuk at all for this halacha where the blood is brought inside and it wasn't supposed to. And the Gemara says, L'dvarav de Rabbi Akiva ka'amar, that's correct. Rabbi Yossi Haglili, when he's responding here, he's just responding according to Rabbi Akiva, according to the way that you learn the pasuk. I would darshan in the following fashion, but Rabbi Yossi Haglili actually learns the pasuk in an entirely different fashion. And Rashi explains, Lahachi hu da'asa, is it really for lachatos chitzona shenichnas damo lifnim? Does Rabbi Yossi Haglili really learn that the pasuk is talking about an outer chatos where the blood is brought inside? Hachi garsinan, the proper text is kol onyin hazeh eino medaber. Again, this whole topic is really talking about. And Rashi explains, v'ad rabbanon polig b'toras kohanim. Over here, Rabbi Yossi Haglili is arguing on the rabbanon, and this is in Toras Kohanim, to mukminon le lipsul chatos hachitzona shenichnas damo lifnim, because again, they understand the pasuk is talking about a disqualification when the outer chatos, the blood goes inside. V'yamar lehu, and he says to them he says to them in Toras Kohanim, ein ha-mikra medaber. That's not what the pasuk is talking about. Rather, ein ha-mikra medaber ela bepnimios shadamam nichnas lifnim mitzvah. We're talking about the inner chatos where you're supposed to bring the blood inside. V'yamar kron, what the pasuk is saying over here is shemi'ira behen psul, that if there's some kind of disqualification, yisrafu ha-beis habira be'azara, they should be burned in the beis habira, meaning in the azara. V'lo chutz l'gimel machanos, and then you, in such a situation, you don't burn it outside of the three camps, kimitzvasan, which is the usual thing you do with these parim hanisrafim, sirim hanisrafim, k'dechsiv b'haikra, it's written in this pasuk, ba'kodesh bo'esh tisaref, which means shetei sreif fasa ba'kodesh. The burning should take place in the kodesh. V'litein lo sasei l'achilasan, and then also to say that there's a negative commandment of lo sasei on eating them, bein ksher and bein psul, and that's talking whether it's kosher or puzzle, whether it's kosher or disqualified. It's like it says lo sochal in that place. It doesn't actually say a lo saseh on the eating, v'chas v'kan, and that's written over here. Amru lo, they said, Tim l'dvarecha, according to you, chatas hachitzonis shenichnas dam lefnim minayin shenifsala. Where do we know? What is the source, according to you, Rabbi Yossi Haglili, that an outer chatas, if the blood goes inside, it's pasul, shenifsala, that it's pasul? Amar lo, he said to them, hein lohuva es dama. It's a totally different pasuk. It says lohuva es dama. This is ksiv gabe sir hachatos shesarfu b'nei Aaron. This is written by the he-goat chatos that the sons of Aaron burned. V'kamar lehu Moshe, and over there Moshe says to them, hein lohuva es dama. That the blood wasn't brought inside. inside. Hahuva bedin sarfu. The implication is, if it was brought inside, then it should be burned. That's the source for that idea. And then the Gemara said that Rabbi Yossi Aglili was lidvar of the Rabbi Akiva. He was just responding according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who understands the pasuk talking about, again, outer chatos being disqualified when the blood is brought in. So again, Rabbi Akiva includes all these other karbanos, and he says no, you should only include types of chatos. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Chatos shekibel dama b'shnei kosos. If you have a carbon chatos where the blood is accepted in 2 cups, this is talking about an outer carbon chatos where the blood is supposed to be applied to the outer mizbech, and you have 2 cups with the blood. Yotza echon mehen lachutz. Let's say one of those cups of blood leaves, it goes outside the azara, becomes disqualified. Hapnimi kosher, the one that's still inside the azara is still kosher. It doesn't disqualify the blood in the other cup. Nichnas echon mehem lifnim. Now let's say one of the cups goes inside the heichal, so it's disqualified. So in that case, we have a machlokas tanoim about the remaining cup. Rabbi Yossi Aglili machshir b'chitzon. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says the cup that's outside, meaning the cup that's in the azara, is still kosher. The chachamim poslan, and the chachamim say it's disqualified. Again, since the other one went inside the heichal, that disqualifies the one that remains in the azara. And so over here, the chachamim are stricter in this situation, again, where that one cup goes inside the heichal. And so the Mishnah continues, Amar Rabbi Yossi Aglili said to the Chachamim, Ma'im b'mokom sha'machshava poselas b'chutz, in a situation where thought, where intention disqualifies, that's if a person has intention for outside the azara, that creates a disqualification. But there, lo asas ha'meshuyar kayotze, we don't say that the remaining cup is like the one that left the azara. We're lenient in that case, that everybody agrees to. So mokom she'ina machshava poselas b'fnim, in a place where intention does not disqualify, meaning if you had intention to bring the blood inside the azara, that intention does not create a disqualification. Eino din shelo nasas hamashuyar kenichnas. Isn't it logical to say that what remains, meaning the blood that remains in the azara, it should not be like the one that entered? We should actually be more lenient in that situation. And so therefore, Rabbi Yossi Aglili is saying to the Chachamim, why are you more strict in that situation? And Rashi explains, Yotza echon mehem lachutz means chutz li azara. Again, one of the cups of blood leaves the azara. Hapnimi kosher, the cup that remained in the azara is kosher. Minosin mimenu matanosav, he can give the applications of blood. Va'akarbon ololo, and the carbon is accepted. Nichnas echon mehenet lifnim, if one of the cups goes lehechol, into the hechol, then machshir b'chitza, and then we have a machlokas tanoim. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that the one that remained outside, meaning the one that remained in the azara, is kosher. Law says, Mimenu matanosav, again, you can apply the blood, carbon kosher, and the carbon is kosher. V'chachamim poslam, but in that case, the chacham say disqualified, meaning even the remaining cup is disqualified. V'tamayu mefarsh b'gemara, and the reason of the chachamim will be explained in the Gemara. And Rashi continues, Rabbi Yossi Aglili argued to the Chachamim, Umayim b'mokam shemachshava poselas b'chutz, in a situation where intention disqualifies, meaning intention for outside. Kilomar, what it means is, ma b'chutz, if you're talking about outside the azara, shehu mokam, which is an area shemachshava poselas bo, where intention can disqualify. Meaning, imchisha b'shchita, for example, if a person thought during the shchita, he had intention during the shchita, during the slaughtering, al minas lizrok dama b'chutz, he was thinking to throw the blood outside of the azara, Puzzle, that creates a disqualification. You see that outside the azara is strict, but still lo asa eitzel motzi mixas hadam b'chutz. But we don't say that if somebody brings some of the blood outside the azara as hameshuyar b'fnim, that which remained inside the azara kayotzi, it's not the same. Kedam risuapani mikasha, like we said, that the inner is kosher. V'tayim yalfina b'gemara, and the reason for this will be learned in the Gemara. So then he argued makam she'ena machshava poselos b'fnim. If a place where intention does not disqualify, meaning inside the heichal, kilomar, again, it means to say heichal shu makom shein machshava poselos b'fnim. The heichal, which is a place where intention does not disqualify. Shim shachar al menas litin es hanitanim b'chutz b'fnim. If a person would slaughter an animal with the intention to take blood that should have been applied outside and to apply it inside, kosher, that would still be kosher. He has intention to apply it wrongly in the heichal, that intention doesn't disqualify. Kedamrinun b'perakol apsulin, like we say in perakol apsulin, so eino din. So isn't it logical to say that we should be lenient in such a situation? And the Mishnah continues, Nichnas lechaper, let's say the blood that was not supposed to be brought in the heichel, it's brought in the heichel in order to atone, but afal pishalo keeper, even though it was not actually applied for atonement, it was just brought in, but it wasn't applied inside the heichel, Pasul, still that's disqualified. The very fact that it entered the heichel creates the disqualification. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Shimon says, Ad sheyechaper, no, the disqualification is only when there's actually an atonement, when the blood is actually applied inside the heichel. Rabbi Yehuda says, Im hichnis shogeg, if he brought it into the heichel by mistake, then kosher, then it is kosher, that's not a disqualification. Kol hadamim psulin, all disqualified blood, shenitnu al gavi hamizbeach, which are applied on the mizbeach, lo hirtza hatzitz, the tzitz, which is the front plate worn by the Kohen Gadol, it will not allow that blood to be accepted, ella al hatame, except if you're talking about a situation of tame blood, shahatzitz miratza al hatame, because the tzitz is able to be miratza by tame, ve'eno miratza al hayotze, but it is not able to cause acceptance of blood that's applied that was yotze, that left the proper area, that left the azara, that the tzitz is not going to affect acceptance for. The tzitz only affects acceptance for tumah. And Rashi explains, Ad sheyechaper b'heichol, again, until there's actually an atonement, until it's actually applied in the heichol. V'ein hatzitz meratza al hayotze, and the tzitz does not affect acceptance on yotze, on blood that left the azara, damrinan beperek sheni, because we say in the second parak, ha'eno nose ella avon tameh, it only is able to bear the sin of tumah, that's all the tzitz is able to affect acceptance for. V'afa gav dipsula, now even though other kind of disqualified blood, sha'olu lo yirdu, the halach is that once they go up on the mizbeach, other items that are disqualified, they don't come down, but are tsuye miha lo miratzu, but still they are not accepted, so therefore it's not going to affect acceptance again, only for tumah. And the Gemara says, Tanya, we learned in a brayso, so Amar Rav Yossi Haglili, Rav Yossi Haglili says, Kal v'chomer, we should make the following Kal v'chomer. Uma b'mokom shemachshava poselas b'chutz, if an area where intention disqualifies, meaning again outside the azara, lo posal dam shebechutz es shebifnim, we don't say that the blood that's brought out of the azara disqualifies the blood that remained in the azara. So mokom she'ein machshava poselas bifnim, an area where intention does not disqualify, meaning in the heichol, so eino din shelo yifsal dam shebifnim es shebechutz, isn't it logical to say that the blood brought into the heichol shouldn't disqualify the blood that remained in the azara? Amrulei, they said to him, Hareyu Omer, but it says in the pasuk Asher Yuva Midama, it says that the blood is brought, and we learn from there Afilu Mixas Dama, even if some of the blood from the animal is brought into the heichol, that disqualifies all the blood. So essentially, it's learned from a pasuk not to make this Kal v'chomer. Amar Lahem, so he said to them, Rabbi Yossi Haglili said to them, Kal v'chomer liyotze me'ata. Well, if that's true, based on the pasuk, we should then make a Kal v'chomer the other direction and be strict in a case where some of the blood is brought out of the azara. If in a situation where machshava does not disqualify, meaning in the heichol, there it's more lenient inside, posel dam shebifnim es shebechutz, we say that the blood brought into the heichol can disqualify the blood that remained outside the heichol, that remained in the azara. So makom shemachshava poselos b'chutz, a place where intention does disqualify, meaning outside the azara, eino din sheyifsol dam shebechutz es shebifnim, isn't it logical to say that the blood brought outside should disqualify the blood that remained in the azara? Amru lo, so they said back to him, they said back to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, Harehu Omer, but it says in the pasuk, Asher Yuva, that which is brought inside the heichol, and we learn from there, Hanichnas posel, only when it's brought in the heichol, it creates this disqualification. Ve'ein hayotze posel, but if it's brought outside the azara, it doesn't disqualify the blood that remained inside the azara. And the Gemara continues and asks, Utehei machshava bifnim posels mikal v'chomer, but we should make a different kal v'chomer. We should say that when a person has a wrong intention about bringing the blood inside the heichel when he shouldn't have, so that intention should disqualify from the following kal v'chomer. Uma b'mokom shelo pasal dam shebechutz es shebifnim, if in an area where the blood again brought outside the azara doesn't disqualify the blood brought in the azara, but machshava poseles b'chutz, but if you have intention for outside the azara, that disqualifies. So mokom shepasal dam shebifnim es dam shebechutz, a place where there is a disqualification, when the blood brought inside can disqualify the blood that remained outside, that remained in the azara. Eino din shetei machshava poseles bifnim, isn't it logical to say that intention should disqualify even if that intention is to bring it inside? And to that the Gemara says Harehu Omer, but the pasuk says Bayom Hashlishi, it says Bayom Hashlishi, And Rashi explains, midama afilu mixus. The Chachamim say it says midama, even some of the blood, meaning even if some of the blood is taken inside, that disqualifies the blood that remained in the azara. Midaloksiv es dama, from the fact that it doesn't say es dama, it says midama, and we make this drasha. And Rashi says Rabbi Yossi HaGlili. Now Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, why doesn't he agree with this? L'taime, that he goes according to his reasoning. To Amar, as we just said earlier, that Rabbi Yossi HaGlili says, Hai Kra, this pasuk bechatos hapnimios ksiv, is talking about a completely different issue. It's talking about the inner chatos, upsul dechitzona shenichnas dama lifnim, and the disqualification when you have an outer carbon where the blood is brought inside. Mehein lahuva es dama, that comes from a completely different pasuk of hein lahuva es dama, vahu kulei mashma. That pasuk is understood as meaning all of the blood. And Rashi continues, Utei machshava poselas. The Gemara then asks that machshava should be poselas, even if it's a machshava about inside the heichal. Rashi says, Hashas kaboila. This is a question of the Gemara. V'lo garas lo b'Toras Kohanim b'milsa de Rabbi Yossi HaGlili. This is not in the Toras Kohanim in the words of Rabbi Yossi HaGlili. Dehaladidei nami ikal miboy, because this question can be asked even according to Rabbi Yossi HaGlili. And then the Gemara said that we don't say. We don't say that machsheves pnim is poselas, because it says by Yom Hashlishi harehu omer b'machsheves chutz l'mekomo shlishi. It says when a person has intention outside the proper place, it says the word shlishi. To mukminon b'perek beis, we said earlier in the second perek, teneu le'inyan chutz l'mekomo. This part of the pasuk is talking about chutz l'mekomo. Ulahachi naked le b'lashon shlishi, and that's why we say a language of shlishi, the word shlishi. De'in machsheves makom poseles. If a person has the wrong intention of location, it only disqualifies elim kain mishulash b'dam u'basar ve'imur. It has to be a place which is threefold, meaning a place where the blood, the meat, and the sacrificial portions can all be offered. Kagon chutz le'azara. Now that would be true outside the azara. In theory, you can have dam, basar, and imur, and all outside the azara. Shebeshas heter habamos mitzuyin shloshtem bo, because in the time when bamos were allowed, all three applied outside the azara. La'afuke machsheves hachnasa. Now that comes to exclude, let's say, bringing into the heichal. The area of the heichal is not mishulush. The lav makom basar ve'imur, who the heichal is not a place for the meat. It's not a place for the imurin, for the sacrificial portions. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Beis Amud Beis.